Hey Algebra 1, today we're going to do system of equations dealing with quadratics. We're going to do 2 days of this. The first day, we're going to always do it where y is by itself and solve it like that. And on the second day, we'll deal with when y is not by itself. But today, we're just going to practice exactly what y is by itself. All right, so let me pick an example. I'm looking at the textbook right now. My example is going to be y equals 3x plus 2 and y equals 3x squared plus 6x plus 2. Okay, so the system of equations should sound familiar to you guys. System of equations was something we did back in chapter a while back. I can't think where. But that section, it had to be near the mid-year, if I remember correctly. Because I don't remember if it was on your midterm or not. But system of equations was when we had that substitution method or the elimination method where we added or subtracted. And sometimes you multiply first. So hopefully I'm just jogging your memory. What we're going to focus on this section is just substitution method. We can't really do elimination method for this reason. There's no x over here, like x to the 1 power. Also, eliminating doesn't solve my issue of dealing with two variables. So we're just doing substitution. So how do we substitute? Remember, we have to set them equal to the same thing. Today, we'll focus where they both equal y, so we minimize the hassle of that. Because they both equal y, that must mean they both equal the same thing. When they both equal the same thing, that must mean they both equal to each other. So I could start up step 1, set each other equal to each other. So 3x plus 2, set both equations equal to each other. 3x squared plus 6x plus 2. Okay, something dealable now. We at least are no y's, so now we could basically solve. Why don't we do some algebra and move all the numbers into one side, set it equal to 0. We'll see if we could do that. So I'm going to move this left side first because I'll move the left side to the right because there are less things here. So I'm going to subtract 2, and I could combine it with like terms, so let's subtract 2 over there. And I'm minusing 3x. I'm going to subtract 3x over here because they're like terms. This cross out, this cross out. Since everything's crossed out here, it's left with 0. 3x squared, nobody interacted with them. Minus 3x. 2 minus 2 happens to be 0, so I don't need to write that. From here, I need to solve the equation. Now, this takes all the other ones we learned about. This one, because we don't have any c, it would be very easy just to take out or factor out what's in common. So what's in common between 3x squared and negative 3x? Well, in numbers, it's a 3. And in variables, it's only 1x. So what's in common is 3x. And what's left over is what happens when I divide 3x on both of these. So the 3x squared divided by 3x is just x. And exactly the same on top and bottom should be 1. So now I'm left with 0 equals 3x parentheses x minus 1. From here, we got to use our 0 property. We could split this, separate it, because they're all x's, and solve each one equals 0. So 0 equals 3x divided by 3 on both sides. That makes x equals 0. So one of my answers is x equals 0. We'll see what we mean by one of my answers. 0 equals x minus 1. I'm going to plus 1 on both sides. So 1 equals x. Okay? Now, if you remember from the system of equations, 0. If you remember from system of equations, we just don't want the x. We also need the y value. So what I'm going to do with these x's, 0 and 1, is plug it into the one that I think is easier. I think it's clear that the top one looks easier. So let's plug in 0. So when x equals 0, I'm going to plug in 3x plus 2. So 3 times 0 plus 2. That becomes equals y. That means y equals 2. So this point is 0, 2. And then we have another one, x equals 1. This one, we're going to plug in 1 into the top one again. We picked the easier of the two, and the top one looks easier. Y equals 3 times 1 plus 2. So y equals 5. Your second answer is 1 comma 5. So we got 0 comma 2 and 1 comma 5 as both of your answers. I'm going to do one more example on here where we have to do something different down at the end. Okay, let's do another example. Y equals x plus 4, y equals 2x squared minus 3x minus 2. Why don't we solve this out? So how do we solve this out? Well, first we see if they're equal to the same thing. They are. Because they're equal to the same thing, we can set them equal to each other. So I got x plus 4 equals 2x squared minus 3x minus 2. Next thing I want to do is move all my things to one side. I said equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 4, subtract 4. Remember, like terms go with each other, so the subtract 4 is going to go here. And minus x, minus x. So these cross out completely, so there's 0 on the left. So we got 2x squared. Nobody interacted with that, that is fine. Minus 4x, because it's negative 3x minus 1x would be negative 4x. And then negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. Okay? Now we're left with a situation where we have a c. So we're going to have to use one of our methods to factor. Now you have multiple methods these days. You have factoring, you have to complete the square, you have quadratic equation. Because quadratic equation is the last thing we practice, I'm going to use that on purpose. But this one, I believe is factorable. Let me check real quick. This one's factorable. And this one you can use completing the square. But I'm just going to use quadratic equation because that's what I choose. Very important though, you can choose which one. You could do slide and divide. If you remember that from a long time ago, slide over here, then find the factors and divide at the end. But what I'm trying to show you is that, actually maybe I'll do both here, but you can choose what method it is. And it's up to you to choose what method you need to use and identify what you need to use. Which I know sometimes that's the hardest part for you guys. It's like, which one do I use, Mr. Tobel? That's on you to figure out. So I'm going to use quadratic equation on purpose, and then I'll even do slide and divide afterwards to remind you on that. So A is 2, B is negative 4, C is negative 6. Again, you're not forced to remember the quadratic equation, but just to go over it again, is negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay? So let's plug that all in, 2, negative 4, and negative 6. I'm going to pause and just plug it in to save time on the video. Okay, I plugged their A, B, C in here, and I'm going to simplify. So negative 4 is positive 4, over 2 times 2 is 4, plus or minus. By the way, you cannot reduce it like that one-on-one unless you know what this is. We don't know what this is yet. So this over here is negative 4 squared is 16, positive 16 because it's negative 4 squared. Negative 4 times 2 times negative 6. Negative 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is, I'm sorry, I had to cut off there. Negative 4 times 2 times negative 6. All of that together is going to be a positive because two negatives make a positive. 8 times 6 is 48. 48 plus 16 seems to be 64. Yeah. So 4, let me go back here. 4, the square root of 64 over 4. I know what the square root of 64 is. So that's going to be 4 plus or minus 8 over 4. And then from there, oh, sorry, it's a little off camera. From there, I can solve the equation. So I got to do the positive version and the negative version. So positive and negative. So 4 plus 8 over 4, which is 12 over 4, which reduces down to 3. And then 4 minus 8 over 4 equals negative 4 over 4, which equals negative 1. So your two answers for your x's is 3 and negative 1. So then we're going to take that and plug it into the easier equation of the two. Looks like the top one's way easier. And remember, it was 3 and negative 1. So your first point is 3, comma. I plug in a 3 here. 3 plus 4 is 7. And the next one is -1. -1 plus 4 is 3. So -1, comma 3. So here are your two answers, okay? That's it for today. Tomorrow I'm going to show you how to do it on calculator using graphing. And that might be a lot easier for you guys because you just do it in a calculator. You don't have to think all this fancy stuff. You don't have to write so much. And you'd be free to go, okay? So, yeah, that's it. Make sure to pop up in the Zoom, and we'll go over about 1 or 2 problems.